Kia ora and welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your lunch, your long lunch. Right, we move through to number 10, which is around Richardson's Line and Settlers Line Upgrade Project, Program Budget Amendment. There's a report there on page 133 of your papers, and I invite Hamish and Jeff back to the table. Gentlemen, over to you.
Good afternoon, Mr Mayor and councillors. We'll take the report as read, just with the clarity that we're just moving money for the overall project forward a year to align with the contractor's program of works, to make it, put the pipes in the ground first before we build the road, so it's just a realignment.
Okay, before I open it up for questions, so we're not talking new money, are we? We're talking movement of years.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, councillors, questions. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just one quick question. On page 134 under the risks, it talks about the additional workload and says that that would be mitigated by moving some budget funds from other projects to next financial year to help balance staff and supply chain workloads. So have those projects been identified, and if so, when will that be a part of what comes back in the next quarterly report, or is there any? Yeah,
absolutely.
That's the question.
Sarah, it looks like she would like to answer that question on behalf. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, yes, councillor, we have been working with the quarterly report. I know you're giving feedback on the quarterly report at the moment. One of the things that we are striving to do is have an ongoing list of proposed changes to things like carry forwards throughout the year, so that you get clear visibility as early on as we see where there are issues for projects that we think should be carried forward. So yes, it's happening. Yes, hopefully the quarterly report will be the place you see it.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, no other questions. All right. Okay, thanks Hamish and Jeff. So councillors, we have Richardson's Line, Settlers Line Upgrade Project with the Program Budget Amendment that Council resolves and approves the bringing forward of $920,000 in Program 1005, which is Urban Growth, North East Industrial Zone Water Supply, from the 2023-24 financial year to the 2022-23 financial year. I'm going to look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. There being none, we'll move on. We will vote, please. Well, it's passed, 13 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, we now have number 11 on our agenda, which is additional award of 2022 JC Trust Travelling Fellowships. There's a memo from our governance manager on page 141. I'll take that as being read. And I might just ask Councillor Johnson, who's been involved on the selection panel, maybe just to give a brief summary.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So last year, because of COVID restrictions, nobody was able to travel, and we also received no applications to the fund. So the fund didn't pay out at all last year. And the year before, which was 2020 year, again, no international travel was possible. We allowed applications for domestic travel, and we only received one that we could fund at considerably less than the 10,000 maximum. So for the last 2 years, there's been a shortfall, if you like, in the amount of money that we've been able to award. This year, we received a large number of very suitable and appropriate applications, And so the panel wanted to suggest to council that we might, in effect, give out last year's money as well as this year's money by, instead of giving out 10,000, giving out 20,000, which would allow us to fund more of the very, not all, but more of the very suitable applicants. So because we had not resolved to do that in advance, it needed to come to council for approval. And just to be clear that the grants that are paid out come from a separate trust fund. It's not ratepayer money, and so there's no impact on council finances.
Thank you, Councillor. That's a good summary, and I think that's wise, a wise thing to do with where we're at, and it helps re-establish people and their connections too internationally. So are there any further questions of it? I'm quite happy to move this. So additional award of 2022 JC Trust Travelling Fellowships, that Council resolves that Council delegate authority to the JC Trust Travelling Fellowship Selection Panel to approve travelling fellowships of up to 20,000 in the 2022 financial year, with discretion to grant any number of fellowships as long as the total amount of funding does not exceed 20,000. So, and you'll second it, Councillor Johnson. Thank you. Okay. Are there any questions? Sorry, no. Any comments? There being none, we will vote. That has passed 14 votes for, none against. Thank you. Right, we'll move through to number 12 on our agenda, which is the Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust Annual Report and Annual Accounts 2021-22. There's a memo there on a page 143 of our papers from our Governance Manager, Hannah. I'll take that again as being read. I'm on the trust as an ex officio of council, so maybe I could just offer a couple of brief comments. Again, like Councillor Johnson spoke about the JCs, we're sort of in the same position where things around COVID disrupted us, and we've decided, although the trust is in a, it doesn't gain as much income as some other trusts, and we're not looking at depleting our capital fund too much, that we will still be giving out some form of scholarships towards the end of the year, and that'll come through to council in another report. So this is really just accepting the chair's report, which is Sheridan Hickey, who's well known to you. I'll just make one comment that we said we'd received the resignation of Margaret May. Margaret withdrew it, and she's going to stay for another year just to keep some continuity, and we'll be looking forward to celebrating something towards the end of the year with some, as I said, some grants to a couple of organisations. So we'll have the Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust Annual Report and Annual Accounts 2021-22 that Council resolves and receives the Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust Annual Report and Financial Statements for the year ending 30 June 2022 as attached to the memorandum titled Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust Annual Report and Annual Accounts 21-22 presented to Council on the 5th of October 2022. Whew, that's a mouthful. Okay, Councillor Harper, you'll move it, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any comments? There being none, we will vote. And that's passed 13 votes for with 1 abstention. Right, we'll move through to number 13, which is page 155. And we've got a memo there presented by Hamish Featonby, who's our Group Manager of Transport. Hamish, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will again take the memo as written, as read, and open for any questions.
Okay, sorry, I just had people in my ear there. So, so you said take it as read.
Take it as read.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, good. All right, I'll open it up for questions, and there are a number. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Hamish. Just a question around the scope, obviously. Do we have any indication of how long do you think that it will take to do the review for the scope?
So based on the scope in front of us, I think it will probably take us 4 or 5 months. Just depends on the availability of the person to do the review. With Christmas coming, it's not the greatest time to engage someone.
4 or 5 months. And with that budget, what kind of budget will it cost us to do the review?
We were considering keeping the costs within our existing operational budgets, probably in the sort of 15k mark, but it depends on our procurement from here, I guess.
So 15k within existing budgets?
Existing, yes.
Okay. Thank you. That's all my questions. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Hamish. Just a couple of questions. One is to get, I suppose, your perspective around independence of the review, and when you saw the instruction come through for an independent review, kind of how that was interpreted and how that's played out.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, we considered independent to mean someone from external to the organisation coming in and performing the review. So we'd look to find somebody within the transportation space with a background in that area to see whether we're doing things the right way, whether the transport assets are being managed appropriately. So I think the independent part to your question was external to the organisation.
Thanks. I guess how does that relate in terms of yourself and the Chief Infrastructure Officer being identified as the review lead and the review sponsor? Because it seems to me that the sponsor and the lead has some connection that would, for me, I struggle to see how it is independent. I just wanted to get an officer's perspective on that.
Sure, and I think it's our role in the review would be to provide context to the reviewer. If the person doing the review would be impartial, I guess. So I think, yeah.
Just got the CE to speak to.
Thanks, Rick. Good question, and I suppose, just to echo Hamish's comments to start with, we figured that the most important thing from this review was to get someone completely outside of the organisation to come in and have a look at, basically what's going on and the performance of the asset and give us an unfiltered and unbiased view about what we could do, not only as a organisation and as in the infrastructure unit, but also, as a city, because we know we're not happy with the performance of the asset. So, I sort of see this as a sort of a step towards the long-term plan. So you get someone completely external to come in and, give us the unsugar-coated view of what we're facing. So certainly that was where we were going to, get the real independence. And I think actually a massive opportunity that this review gives us. So look, we've been thinking about the issue that you've raised around the independence and what have you. And my suggestion being is that we've got a new chief executive who starts in a month, and that, Wade could be the project sponsor. He's coming from outside the organisation as well. He'll have a fresh set of eyes, experienced in the industry and dealing with these issues. So maybe what we could do is to change the sponsor to the chief executive, and that way, we've got an independent person or organisation who's going to conduct the review, and also the new CE who is, new if not entirely independent, but also sitting above the infrastructure unit who could come in and oversee and provide that governance to the project. So anyway, we're happy if we could make that change, if that would work for you.
May I also speak? Yeah. The other part of the independence and having an external independent and having Hamish and I involved is that we saw an opportunity for that reviewer to also be looking at some of the, I guess, delivery improvements and business improvements that wouldn't necessarily come up in a sort of an assurance type review. So we looked at it as an opportunity to go wider. I think we've got mentioned in the report that the transport and infrastructure part of the infrastructure unit has had fairly significant staff turnover. So there's very few people left who were involved in early decision making around the contract or the procurement or anything like that. So there is necessarily a level of independence in there from having lots of new staff in there. But we did think that it was an opportunity for having, building into our roles, our ongoing roles of business improvement in there as well.
Thank you, and I do appreciate all three of you sharing perspectives around the question and by inference, the additional recommendations. Hamish, also wanted to ask just around the deliverables that are identified in the scope as it's set out. And it talks about a report, but it doesn't really talk about kind of specific recommendations sitting within the report. Is your expectation that just referring to a report is going to give us specific recommendations, or do we kind of run a risk that we end up with kind of a woolly report that doesn't actually focus us into some direct actionable change?
Yes, absolutely. I'd expect some recommendations to come through as part of the report. We're not looking for a summary of the situation, we're looking for improvement. So recommendations that we would bring back to Council.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Hamish. I'm just wondering if the scope of your review encompasses contractor capacity, quality control elements, things like that. Do you see that as being part of your 3.2, not limited to processing contractual levers or options in delivery, or does that need to be specifically added if we want that to be part of it?
Through Mr. Mayor, it's absolutely included as well. So QA is part of our process with them and their own internal process as well. So we'd certainly be addressing whether that's an effective mechanism, whether it's being achieved properly. So. Right.
So we could expect to see that come back as part of the reporting back on this review.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Harpenter.
Sorry, my question was exactly the same as what Councillor Johnson just asked. Thank you.
Okay, there's no more questions. Thanks, Hamish. All right, councillors, we probably need to pass number 3 first because it affects the substantive. So we'll go through to that. So this is around City Transportation Review Scope. Council resolves, number 3, that the scope element 1.2 be amended to section 2, improve responsiveness, efficiency and effectiveness. So I'll go to the mover, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is obviously one of 2 additional recommendations coming. If you look at the structure of the review as it's laid out, it has kind of 3 pieces to it. There's a background piece, then there's a look at things piece, and then there's an improved budget piece. The headline in that middle piece right now is around responsiveness, which is obviously a critical factor in getting all this right. What I would like to see is that we put due emphasis around efficiency and effectiveness as well, Because as soon as we hit the third piece of that review, we're talking about improved budget. And personally, I don't want to have a conversation about improved budget until we have well and truly canvassed effectiveness and efficiency alongside responsiveness. So that's the drive behind this, and I would ask for your support in that, Mr. Mayor.
I'm just going to allow the CE to, would like to ask a question of you on that.
Yeah, thanks, and get your point. So we haven't specifically said that, because you will recall that we did go through quite a robust procurement process to get that contract. So I suppose, to a large extent, I think, if you're looking at the contract in particular, and that is where the vast majority of the activity happens, is that we've had a commercial process to set the rates, I guess. And, we don't feel that we got a bad deal out of that. So I suppose we'd need to understand what else, particularly, outside of what we've already put in the review, that you'd be looking for there.
Thank you for the question. Principally, this is around ensuring that we have a sufficient emphasis on areas. I think you can read down into the detail of the review proposal, and you could find things that you could see as efficiency and effectiveness. I'm wanting to make sure that that hits the top line of the report and isn't lost on the way through. I will accept that there was significant work done to secure the contract that we are currently now in the process of managing. And I'm not expecting that work to be redone. I think that some of that could be communicated and reminded to us in the course of that review, and help us ensure that as elected members we have a comfort around not only responsiveness but effectiveness and efficiency.
So you're not looking to messing around with the cost, the contract rates at all?
No, absolutely not. I'm wanting to make sure that we have a sense of how efficiently that investment is translating into impact.
Okay, that's good, thank you. Okay, any more comments to this? I'll just add that, look, I'm comfortable with what Councillor Barrett is suggesting. We do want some, out of this report, we want some tangible outcomes which can help the officers either improve things or understand that we are being efficient and it is being effective. But clearly with some of the state of things happening at the moment, we just need to understand we're doing the best we possibly can with the network. All right. Okay, we got nobody there in the queue. We'll vote. It's passed, 14 votes for, none against. Right, we'll move through to 1 and 2, and if the mover's okay to move both of those, and the seconder to do both of them, the substantive. So over to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I do want to acknowledge and thank officers for the work done to prepare this review and for the answers to questions raised here during the discussion at council. Obviously, the second recommendation there is additional, and I'll try to explain kind of my rationale around it, but would acknowledge the acting chief executive's comments and sort of open to where debate goes from there. For me, this stems from the instruction that we as council gave through committee and to council is that, and I'll quote that an independent review or peer review is undertaken as soon as possible on city transportation infrastructure seeking improvements, various partnerships and options. So we asked for the review. So to me, it follows that we are then the sponsor of that review. And it in no way diminishes or precludes the chief infrastructure officer or the transportation manager from being involved in it. It just reminds ourselves that we asked for the review and work as its sponsor. The second part relates more to the fact that we asked for an independent review, and we have an independent function within council around business assurance. I'm reminded of only recently when we were in the chamber seeing a review that was done around the environmental sustainability area as an example of that function, working with some external support to provide an independent report in. And I would like to include that same good process in this effort to make sure that we have a good amount of rigor and independence to bring us some clear recommendations that we can then work with. So ask for your support, and that I see it strengthening and adding to what has been offered by staff in response to the original instruction.
Okay, Councillor Naylor.
Mr Mayor, I just have a question really, because will we be taking these separately? Because I'm supportive of the second recommendation, but should this, if we agree to the second recommendation, the scope in the paper actually has something different.
Okay, that's a good point.
So
Thank
can
you.
we say subject to
No.
the amended
Oh,
scope?
no, we'll just do them separately. We'll make them, because then they'll... well, actually, yeah, we will need to amend it, won't we? It'll need to say something along the lines that the council approve the scope of the... let me get it back up. We could have number
Amended
one back
as
up.
per recommendation two.
Yeah, scope of the transportation review from implementation as amended, because it already is in that space. And look, I'm quite happy to move that if you'd like to second it. Yeah, thank you. And we'll take them separately. So if we could go back to number 2. All right. There's other councillors wishing to speak. So Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, just to say that I support the additional recommendation around the review sponsor and the business assurance review lead. I think it's very important that we get good information back, and also that the information that we get is at a high level where we can have a thorough understanding of why we're in the situation that we're in at the moment with the roading. And I feel that if we have a business assurance lens over it, we're likely to have a better analysis, maybe, and a more comprehensive set of recommendations come out of it. And ultimately, the whole idea of this is that we have some tangible actions that can be taken to improve the quality of the roading in the city. And it's not clear to us sitting around the table what needs to be done at this time to achieve that. But what we want from this report is that it becomes very clear what's necessary to achieve that. And I think the more that this is independent of our current roading team, who have to work with the contractor and manage the contract, the better it is.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to support recommendation 1. I'm actually not going to support recommendation 2. Absolutely agree with the intent of what it is, but I don't think it's appropriate for elected members to be passing resolutions where we're allocating individual staff within the organisation pieces of work. And so whether this was going to be the outcome anyway, I don't think it's appropriate, because the manager of business assurance is not somebody who reports directly to elected members. We shouldn't be directing them to be involved in work. It is up to the chief executive to allocate work, and that's where the accountability lies. So whether it was the intent of the chief executive to assign this anyway, I don't think it's appropriate for us to be passing resolutions through the chamber where we're naming staff roles around that. So because it says manager of business assurance be the review lead, I'm not supporting this resolution.
Okay, back to you, Councillor, for any right to reply, if you need it.
Thank you, colleagues, for comments. And I think fundamentally for me, this is about getting good outcomes. It's around rigor, it's around independence, it's around this community's confidence in what council is investing in and delivering. And while I accept the deputy mayor's analysis that this is an imperfect way of achieving that, I'm going to persist with suggesting that we achieve it in that way, so that we do have good assurance around independence and good assurance around rigor and specificity of recommendations that come to us through that process. So I would ask you to support it on that basis so that we can find a best way forward for an incredibly important part of what this council delivers for this community.
All right, thank you. Right, we'll vote on number 2, please. That is passed 11 votes for and 3 against. All right, we will now move to number 14 on our list. Oh, no, sorry, we've got one more. So this is substantive, which is really around ensuring that we approve the scope with the amendments. I don't need to speak to it, and I'm open for if anybody else wants to comment. There being none, we will vote. It's passed 14 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right, we're now to number 14. And this is around the recommendation for appointment and for the wind farm. And I'll invite Jeff Baker, Planning Manager, to speak to this. Page 171.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, this relates to the Te Reriho wind farm repowering. At the moment they have 97 turbines up there. The proposal was to have 30 three-bladed turbines, a la what we've got as part of the Turitea Reserve. It's through the government's fast-track COVID-19 recovery legislation that an application's being made. So our council, to some extent, has a back seat on it. But where we can influence it is in terms of the recommendations or a delegation to have one of our people from our list or our commissioner list on the panel that hears the case. So really this short report is around that. Because it's new legislation, we don't have that delegation at the moment, so seeking that support from this forum. Happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Jeff. And I'll open it up. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Jeff. So these new panels, to what extent is their function advisory, or is it advocacy, or is it some of each?
I read it as a determination. In this case, we've got Judge Newhook will head up the panel, and the Act requires an iwi nomination and a council nomination to sit on that panel, and so they'll hear and ultimately make a decision on the application.
Right. Thank you. I think that clarifies my thinking.
Okay. Right, there's no other questions. Thanks, Jeff. So we've got the recommendations for appointment to the Te Reriho wind farm, and the council resolves that the legal counsel, in liaison with the principal planner, planning services, or the chief customer officer, is delegated authority to nominate one or more commissioners from the current council-approved commissioner schedule to the Environmental Protection Authority and panel convener for their consideration for appointment to the expert consenting panel to consider the Te Rere Hau wind farm application. The legal counsel shall seek input from the chairperson and or deputy chairperson of the hearings committee and or the nominee from the committee. I'm happy to move that. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? And as I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Right, I'll open it up for any comments. There being none, we will vote, please. That has passed 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. We move through to number 15, page 175 of our papers. This is around amendments to light motor vehicle prohibitions, approval for consultation. And we've got Stacey and it's not Julie. Peter, over to you. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, Mayor and Councillors. Yes, you're right, I'm not Julie, filling in for Julie today. So this is an item to approve the amendments to the bylaw for consultation. This piece of work fell out of an earlier report that Julie presented in March, addressing some issues to regards to street races. Stacey's done a fantastic job on this piece of work and is here to answer any questions, and we'll take the report as read.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks. Thank you both for the report. I've just got a couple of questions. The first one is really just around sort of the proposed time frame for this to apply. Can you just tell us about what was the extent of the consultation? I know that there's reference in there that the police thought this was the appropriate sort of time frame, but did we go into that in any broader detail?
Thank you for your question. No, we did not. The hours being proposed in the bylaw amendment are 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. every day of the week. That is supported by the police, and it is consistent with other bylaws of a similar nature around the country. But we did not further consult at this point with anyone else.
Yeah, thank you. So this bylaw or a similar bylaw is actually live in other TLAs around New Zealand, and I assume they are using the same time frame?
Similar. I think some examples, the one that comes to mind is Hamilton City. I think perhaps theirs goes 1 hour longer to 5 a.m. in their bylaw. New Plymouth District Council, I believe, is to 4 a.m.
Okay, thank you. And just the other question I've got there is just around page 207, and it's around the locations which are suggested at this point in time, obviously for public consultation. Is it easy just to add more locations if required?
Is your query related to the process to add a location to the bylaw?
Yeah, add locations, yes. Yeah, the process, yes.
In terms of the process, we have drafted the proposed amendment in such a way that it would allow the council to add a road to the bylaw by resolution. We would support that only being done after engagement with directly affected persons, so property owners or residents of streets that are proposed to have the prohibition apply, and with the support of the New Zealand Police, who in this instance have provided a great deal of information on the roads that are currently proposed to be added.
Great, very helpful, thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. Just had a question around what, if anything, we can do around noise So this is clearly dealing with the kind of gathering and other antisocial kind of aspects here. Do we already have a noise bylaw that would allow us to begin to address some of the noise issues associated sometimes with individual vehicles? And or is there a way that this could be used to address that?
No, we don't have a bylaw that addresses noise, but we do have noise control responses, which is primarily through the RMA and to a certain extent through the district plan. So this is typically when there are parties late at night, there's a complaint and there's a response in accordance with our approach there. In relation to this type of activity though, it's a slightly different prospect. It is theoretically possible that a noise complaint could be received in regards to roadside activity, but the nature of that complaint and the circumstances might limit how the response could be delivered.
Thank you. Can I just follow up to ask around the, I guess, the sort of communication supporting this, in terms of what we'll be doing to help the community understand kind of what is and isn't readily achievable?
Is your question about the communication on the proposal, or
Yes.
more generally?
On the proposal.
So we have prepared an engagement plan for this particular consultation process. There is a focus, firstly, on property owners, residents, business owners on streets identified for the prohibition. We plan to communicate to them the extent of the prohibitions being proposed and the exceptions to those prohibitions. So just assuring them that their day-to-day activities and habits won't be impacted by this. We are planning to communicate that in a way so that they can be assured that they can continue to go about their day-to-day work and life. In terms of perhaps being able to get this messaging through further to the street racer community, that may be slightly more difficult, particularly if we are hoping to get a response from them.
Thanks. I was also thinking about the kind of broader community and making sure that when they see this, they understand kind of where council potentially has power and levers and where we potentially don't, so that we can focus community input kind of into the relevant channels and avoid kind of potentially really dispersive input that doesn't actually help us land something that's effective.
It sounds like you're suggesting communication around how this piece of work fits in with council's broader response to the street racer issue. Is that what you're suggesting?
That would be an example, yes.
I think in terms of the report that's before the council today, it's primarily focused on that engagement response, how we get the community to engage with this proposal. There is presumably opportunity to work through our website, for instance, to provide a more comprehensive picture of what we're doing in response to these issues. But that's not something we've outlined here today.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you, Councillor. There's no other questions here, so thanks, Stacey and Peter. Okay, we've got amendments to the traffic and parking bylaw 218 light motor vehicle prohibitions, approval for consultation. One, that pursuant to section 155 -1 of the Local Government Act 2002, the council determined that a bylaw is the most appropriate way of addressing the perceived problems caused by light motor vehicle street racer activity, which affects the safety of other road users, is harmful to the environment and causes nuisance to owners or occupiers of neighbouring businesses and residential properties. And number two, that pursuant to section 1552-A of the Local Government Act 2022, the Council determined that the amendment of the Palmerston North Traffic and Parking Bylaw 2018 is the most appropriate form of a bylaw. There's more. 3, that pursuant to section 1552-B of the Local Government Act 2022, I'm glad this is the last meeting, the Council agrees that it is not anticipated that an amended Palmerston North Traffic and Parking Bylaw would give rise to the implications under the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act 1990. Number 4, that the Council approve the amendments to the Traffic and Parking Bylaw 2018 light motor vehicle prohibitions. Statement of proposal attached to the memorandum titled Amendments to the Traffic and Parking Bylaw 2018 light motor vehicle prohibitions. Approval for consultation with the public. Number 5, that the Acting Chief Executive be authorised to approve minor amendments to the consultation document prior to publication. Phew. Is that all of them? Okay. Thank goodness. Amending some of our more industrial areas, and now the problem just moves. And until it gets outside your house or very close to you, you're probably not aware of it, but it is real and features every night with some tapings of what has actually been happening, and it just goes on and on to the early hours of the morning. So we do need some levers, some sticks to try and control this sort of activity. So again, just thank the officers, and we'll see what comes out of the consultation, but it's looking pretty thorough at this stage. So I'm quite happy to move these and hope that you support them. Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I just really want to, I guess, encourage everybody to support this. This activity in our community is it's prevalent right across Aotearoa, New Zealand. It frequently leads to fatalities and serious injuries, property damage and disorderly behaviour. In our industrial areas, it is a plague, to put it mildly. And there is disruption and impacts on commercial operations in our community. And also there is a substantial cost to council in terms of the clean-up of the areas affected. This is a sensible approach that provides police with an opportunity to get in front of the problems caused by this group, and police can actually act before gatherings become too large or dangerous. So getting in front of the problem is an important way to approach this. This is not intended to be a standalone solution, but part of a suite of interventions across both prevention and enforcement. And if we use both prevention and enforcement collectively, then we stand a better chance of achieving a more sustainable outcome. This bylaw, once it goes through public consultation, provides us with an opportunity to put pressure on behaviours through fines. Yet in most cases, young people or people involved in this activity, it won't lead to a criminal conviction. So it's an appropriate way to put pressure on those involved with this antisocial and often dangerous behaviour. So I'll just ask that, that you support this to go through for consultation. The reality is that where this affects residential areas, people feel very unsafe, and it's important that this council does what it can to ensure that our community feels safe and supported. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right. Thank you, Councillor. No more comments. Look, I just agree, the prevention and the enforcement, it's not one or the other, it's both. And along with the traffic calming infrastructure where appropriate, and we've started to put that in place in limited areas, but this bylaw hopefully will give us another lever to pull as well, along with the enforcement from our police colleagues. So I'll ask you to support this, and we'll vote now, please. That is passed 100%, 14 votes for, none against. Thank you. Okay, we now move to number 16 on our order paper, which is around the Vogel Street Safety Investigation Plan. Have a memo there from Hamish Featonby, our Group Manager of Transport, and Chris Lai. Welcome, Chris. And it's on page 225 of your papers, councillors. Over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Once again, I'll take this paper as read with just the comment that it is an opportunity for us to come up to understand what this road is intended for within our network. We do have some work coming up, a paper soon on prioritisation of the different modes within our network. So this will feed into that process.
Thank you. I'll open up for any other questions, councillors. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of brief questions. In terms of the next steps, are you looking at much by way of further data collection or modelling, or is it kind of working with existing inputs and just advancing that?
Sure. So through you, Mr Mayor. So as part of one of our penalty actions is to create this network model, which will allow us to analyse how that route works and look at some of the future scenarios, such as the Kiwi Rail hub coming in, what that will do to the traffic within that part of the network, and say if we prioritise one road over another by detuning, for example, if we detune Vogel Street, what does that do to all the other remaining roads? What does that do to the congestion? So that data and that analysis will feed into this process.
Yep, thanks. That's helpful. Can you tell us what detune is?
I guess it's layman's, well, it's a funny way of saying slowing the traffic down by putting infrastructure in their way, putting, say, raised pedestrian crossings, which would force the traffic to slow down, make it more unpleasant for trucks to drive down there. They'd prefer to go somewhere else.
Helpful. Also wanted to understand kind of trees and how you end up kind of valuing and responding to trees in these sort of scenarios.
So we do have a vegetation framework which we would apply to the trees there. I guess the issue with Vogel Street is that there is limited space. There's multiple different modes competing for the same space, including the trees, unfortunately. So we can't please everybody, and I guess we'll just be working to figure out which way to go with it.
So the information that comes back will have clear information both about transport and trees?
Absolutely, yes.
Great, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Hafter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks so much, Hamish. Just when you say recommendation 2 that will be presented back to Council in early 2023, what are you thinking that will be, just to give us a guideline, when do you think that will be, like as early February, March, May, June, July?
Definitely one of those, yes.
As vague as that?
No, I apologise. I would say we would like to have it in time for the next annual plan. So we'd like to have the paper to you a month or two before that.
That would be the guidance. That would be great. So thank you for that. Thank you, Hamish.
Councillor Johnson.
I feel a bit nervous now, but anyway. Under 9.3, where you've said the decision would either need to be added into the 23-24 annual budget process or go forward with a funding application to Waka Kotahi, at what point would we decide which of those it was going to be? Or would that be a recommendation in your report that comes back early next year?
Yes. So along with the options of what we do, there'll also be an options of how we fund it, I guess.
Right,
so
okay.
we can wait for the next opportunity to go for funding through Waka Kotahi, which is the next LTP, or we could bring it forward.
Pay for it ourselves a bit sooner.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no more questions. So thank you, gentlemen. You got off pretty lightly, Chris. Okay, Vogel Street Safety Investigation Plan. Council resolves, 1, that we receive the Vogel Street Safety Investigation Plan report. 2, that Council note that a report on the implementation options for Vogel Street safety improvements be presented to Council in early 2023. I'm happy, or Councillor Barrett can move it. I'm happy to second it. And I'll open it up for, well, first I'll go to you, Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Principally to say, really appreciate the obvious amount of work that officers put into this report. This is an excellent example of a report that lays out the originating instruction, lays out the context from officers' point of view, shows some of the challenges that are faced, and begins to point towards some options. So a huge thanks to whoever put in all the hard yards to get us this far. We will have some challenging decisions to make in this space, but those are down the track. And I think this is simply to acknowledge that there is a really good piece of work underway now that will give us some good information to act on in that regard. I suppose there is a little bit of a question for me around timeliness, and it's somewhat what Councillor Johnson was beginning to allude to, perhaps through her questions around budget. But, you know, for that community and the residents in that street, kind of best case, we're 18 months between them beginning to interface council around that risk that they face every single day. 18 months between that and, you know, potentially landing some actual solutions for them. I acknowledge that good things take time, but I would urge us to act as rapidly as possible to address the concerns that were raised by literally hundreds of people in the community directly affected in Vogel Street. So, to the report, would absolutely endorse it and urge you to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Yes, well, I also wanted to say what an excellent report it was. It was really thorough. It was timely in response to the residents' petition. And it sets out the options. And I think, you know, where we get a really good report like this, it's well worth us commenting on it. Because this is the sort of helpful response to problems that residents raise that we should be highlighting. When people come and say, oh, there's no point talking to council, they don't listen, this is the sort of report that should be used as an example of how we do listen and how council can be responsive to residents' concerns. So I wanted to highlight that to start with. And secondly, to say that I think it's really useful when we get these reports to also have an idea, as this one has indicated to us, of options going forward for funding. So if there is external funding available, it's helpful to know the times that might be available versus if we might need to put in extra funding ourselves in an annual plan. And so I just thought this was a really, really good report that addressed a lot of the issues that were raised, that will provide the basis for future action. And I just wanted to commend the officers for writing it. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. All right. No other comments? We will... You don't need to write a reply, do you? No. We will vote. It's passed, 14 votes for, none against. Right, we're on to number 17 of our order paper, and it's around council resolving to receive the work schedule dated October 2022. I'll look to move that. I'll second to thank you, Councillor Harpiter. This is pretty academic because we'll go into a new term, or the council will go into a new term, and ultimately terms of reference will dictate what's on work schedules going forward, and that's yet to be decided. So I'm going to take this as being done. So is there any comments? There being none, we will vote, please. This passed, 13 votes for, none against. I'm just going to skip to number 19, which is presentation of recommendations from the Community Development Committee of the 14th of September 2022, and ask the Chair, Councillor Johnson, to speak to that, please.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to present the Part 1 Public Community Development Committee recommendations from the 14th of September 2022 meeting for adoption. Thank you.
And online, will Councillor Bowen second that? Yes, thank you, she does. Yes. Good. All right, are there any matters arising from that? There being none, we will vote, please. It's passed 12 votes for and 1 abstention. Right, we'll move through to number 20, which is around the presentation of recommendations from the Environmental Sustainability Committee of 21st of September 2022. I ask the Chair, Councillor Barrett, to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My pleasure to present for adoption the Part 1 Public Environmental Sustainability Committee recommendations from 21 September 2022 meeting.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Butt. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote, please. And this passed, 14 votes for, none against. All right, we'll go back to number 18, which is around the presentations of recommendations for the Planning and Strategy Committee of the 14th of September, and I'll ask the Deputy Mayor, the Chair, to speak to those.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to present the Part 1 Public Planning and Strategy Committee recommendations from the 14th of September 2022 meeting for adoption.
And seconded by Councillor Hancock. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote, please. And that is passed, 13 votes for and 1 abstention. Right, we'll move through to number 21 on the order paper, which is the presentation of recommendations of the Finance and Audit Committee of the 28th of September 2022. Chair, Councillor Beattie, to speak to this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It gives me great pleasure to present the Part 1 Public Finance and Audit Committee recommendations from the meeting of the 28th of September 2022.
And seconded by Councillor Naylor. Okay, are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote, please. That has passed, 13 votes for and 1 abstention. Okay, we now need to move to go to Part 2 and exclude the public. And I look to move this around resolving the public be excluded from the following parts of the meeting listing in the table below, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And no comments. I'll ask you to vote, please. And that is passed, 14 votes for and none against. We might just continue to move forward if you're okay. Is that okay? I think we can get through this quite quickly.